Phosphorus mining facilities are created to mine phosphate rock, which farmers around the world use as fertilizer for agriculture and food production. But the mining process creates waste and wastewater that can't be safely disposed of, and if there's a leak, it can be toxic to the surrounding environment. That's what happened at Piney Point.
Officials in Florida are scrambling to avoid an environmental disaster amid fears over possible flooding of contaminated water in the Tampa Bay area.
A leak in the containment wall has been ongoing at the Piney Point facility. A structure collapse could occur at any time.
We're completely terrified, like absolutely terrified.
It's been 1 year since there was nearly a catastrophe at Piney Point, a former phosphate mining facility in Florida, when a leak was detected in the lining of a gypstack, which is essentially a massive raised crater made of phosphate fertilizer waste. According to the EPA, that waste contains certain radioactive elements, and that liner is what prevents processed water, seawater, and dredge material from seeping into the surrounding environment.
The failure points, and they happen constantly. I mean, hourly. We are doing everything possible to prevent a true catastrophe, which would be the failure of that stack system.
At that time, there were somewhere around 600 million gallons of processed water at risk of a full breach. It would have sent about a 20-foot wall of water into the surrounding areas within an hour. Hundreds
of people were evacuated.
When we saw on a map how close it was to us, I mean, my stomach turned. You know, I have a 19-month-old daughter. We're completely terrified, like absolutely terrified.
Residents were allowed to return within a few days, but the damage was already done.
The water does look an eerie bright green.
Even if it's an inch of this water in your yard, would you want an inch of water like that in your yard?
Officials ended up discharging more than 237 million gallons of untreated wastewater into local waterways to prevent the full collapse. A decision that helped create a deadly summer for marine life in Tampa Bay.
When you have an industrial site that has this type of material and structure, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that this has a potential hazardous risk for the environment.
But even with that risk, phosphate mining remains widespread in the U.S., particularly in the Southeast.
Phosphate mining primarily supports the fertilizer industry, and Florida is a part of the country that is rich in phosphates, and it's supported a multi-billion-dollar phosphate industry for many years. But the production of fertilizer itself is a pretty waste-intensive process. For every 1 unit of usable fertilizer, it produces about 5 units of waste that precipitates out into a solid called phosphogypsum. There usually aren't a lot of comprehensive plans for removal of that waste product, and it's a hazard that over time can cause harm to the environment if it's not maintained properly.
Phosphate mining dates back centuries, as do the dangerous incidents at the facilities. Critics say that Piney Point has been mismanaged since the 60s and has been the site of various toxic fumes, leaks, and wastewater dumping.
What happened last year was not the first time they've released wastewater from Piney Point, but it was by far the largest release that they've had to date. First thing we saw was right around the vicinity of Piney Point at the discharge site was an algal bloom. This was your run-of-the-mill, non-harmful species that we kind of expected. But what happened after that was a few other things that we didn't expect, that we normally don't see.
What happened with Piney Point is they're pumping millions of gallons of water into the bay, and it's full of phosphorus, right? And so all of a sudden, all this phosphorus is shocking the system.
We took a boat to Port Manatee, where the toxic wastewater is being pumped into the bay. You can't see it, but you can smell the foul odor.
Did you know what was coming?
Yeah, we had a feeling. I mean, it was a gut kick.
The 186 metric tons that entered the lower part of the Tampa Bay in that 10-day period, that's usually what we see in a total year. It's something the bay is not used to. It's something that the ecology of the system can't handle.
What Piney Point did was it added fuel to the fire, having a phosphogypsum stack located adjacent to some of the most fragile water bodies that we have in the state. Certainly was a historic mistake.
That summer, a harmful algae bloom known as red tide had creeped into Tampa Bay from the Gulf of Mexico.
The worst conditions that Tampa Bay has seen in 50 years, the worst red tide, the worst fish kill. It's really horrific.
Governor Ron DeSantis quickly vowed that, quote, the problems at Piney Point must end, and that he was directing the Department of Environmental Protection to develop a plan to ensure this never happens again. A year after the latest crisis at Piney Point, a plan to close the site was approved. The wastewater will be pumped into a deep injection well.
The deep well injection is done because the water is so tainted that it can't be discharged to the surface. Once it's injected, there's no way to ever clean it up. All wells leak over time.
All of the solutions that have been put out there, none of them are necessarily ideal, but the deep water injection drill seems to be the best option at this point.
And the well may not come soon enough. The rainy season is approaching.
Unfortunately, the well probably won't be ready until late in the year or very early, hopefully next spring. There currently is capacity in the stacks for about 25 inches of rain. That's a scary thought because it just takes an above normal storm season during our hurricane season to potentially drop more water than the stacks can hold.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has disconnected or is no longer in service.
And Piney Point isn't the only site where an environmental disaster like this could happen. There are 26 other phosphate mines in Florida, 9 of which are still active.
I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, fertilizer isn't something that has value. I mean, I have a lawn. I like food. I eat food that depends on fertilizers. I understand the value of fertilizer in modern society, so I'm not going to say we get rid of all fertilizer mines. That's not practical. But I think what needs to be done is just greater oversight. What is the long-term implication, the long-term management of these sites moving forward?
Of the history of phosphate mining in the state of Florida has been one of mishaps and spills and catastrophic failure. This is not an issue that's going away anytime soon. It's one of those things, it's hard to be optimistic. You can be hopeful, but not optimistic.